So we're going to go ahead and move on, and Cabran Manolo is going to provide us with, we had a kind of a broader overview of the mapping and assessment work that covered work in many countries, and now we're going to take more of a specific look at one case, and that's the case of Malawi. So with that, we'll hand it over to Manolo.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody, or good evening, depending where you are. I'm presenting findings from the Child Protection System Mapping and Assessment exercise in Malawi when it's related to the social welfare workforce working on child protection. So the presentation is divided in three parts. The first one is on the general overview of the mapping and assessment process. The central part is on the findings, and the last part is on general consideration on collecting data on child protection mapping under the angle of the social welfare. So the purpose of the mapping and assessment in Malawi was threefold. The first thing was to have a unique repository of all the information that are available on child protection under both angles of justice and social welfare, and with a geographical scope that covers national and subnational levels. So we also had information from district and traditional authorities and groups of village. One of the I think the findings is that there is a plethora of information, but it's scattered among all actors and among all stakeholders. So it's really important to have a unique child protection report presenting all the important information. The second one is to inform the development of the government child protection strategy covering 2012 and 2016, strategy that has been endorsed by the government in January of this year, and adopts the system approach to child protection. So it really focuses on what are the international agreed elements of the child protection system. And last but not least is to constitute the baseline to develop the costed implementation plan of the Child Care Protection and Justice Act that the Parliament passed in 2010. I think that globally, law enforcement for child protection is a challenge. So the idea in Malawi is that the mapping and assessment exercise should inform the implementation of the Act and all the other relevant legislation to child protection. So very quickly, what was the process in Malawi? The way we arrange the mapping and assessment was that the government, through the Ministry of Gender, Children and Community Development, ensure the leadership of this exercise through the Department of Social Welfare. And this is, of course, very, very important. We will see how there has been a continuous effort to strengthen the child protection system and the social welfare workforce in Malawi. The oversight was done by the National Technical Working Group on Child Protection, which also participated in planning the data collection, in providing information, and in reviewing the findings of the mapping and assessment. And the technical implementation was assured by an international consultant that in this case was me. In terms of the major steps, it's interesting to show how it took quite a long time from the launching of the process to the final endorsement, which is expected next month. The actual data collection took 3 months, but then there have been challenges due to the political situation here in Malawi. So we had to adjust the timetable according to this situation. Very, very briefly, this is the toolkit structure. So this toolkit has been developed by Maestral International for UNICEF. It's interesting to see how the toolkit covers the same research question that were included in Child Frontier methodology, but the methodology is actually different. So what is important for us is that the part on the social welfare workforce falls under the system overview, and you see it in the top right of the slide. And it was split in different parties. So you had a part on what is the specific ministry who has a core responsibility, which is mandated of child protection, but you also could find information on social welfare workforce in other parts of the toolkit. So after the revision was been adopted in January of this year, a new tool, a new part of the toolkit has been added, which deals directly with the social welfare workforce. One of the strengths, I would say, of this toolkit is that after each tool there is a part where 3 to 5 priorities have to be identified, and these priorities are automatically replicated. The toolkit is based on a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. These priorities are automatically replicated into a summary of priorities where the strategy can be developed, and there is a tool which allows the costing of the implementation of the strategy. In terms of data collection, the whole mapping and assessment was as participatory as possible. We had 37 interviews with key informants from government side, but also from civil society organizations. We had 4 workshops to collect information on community mechanisms, justice, civil society, continuum of care. We planned some focus group discussions, but this unfortunately could not happen, so we are lacking information from the beneficiary perspective on the mapping and on the child protection system. It did not happen because the data collection time coincided with a period of civil unrest in Malawi, so travel was banned for a certain time, and we were not allowed to go and meet with the people at district level. And then nearly 180 child protection relevant documents have been analyzed, covering also the normative framework, but also more statistical information or survey or studies that have been conducted along the year. Now we move to the, more specifically to the findings on the social welfare workforce in Malawi. So the first thing that we have to say is that when we talk about social welfare, the definition which is used here in Malawi refers to people working within Ministry of Gender in the social welfare department and in the district social welfare offices. This doesn't mean that there are no other actors performing social welfare tasks and responsibilities, but given the focus of the mapping and assessment on child protection, we just limited the scope of our research to those who were mandated of child protection responsibilities. So in general, there are 128 social workers at district level which are directly engaged in child protection and social welfare responsibilities. Here you can see in the slide the different breakout according to the seniority level. The more senior, which are the district social welfare officer, there are 73. 44 of them are also probation officer, and they can appear in front of courts to present, investigate, and assess cases where children are in conflict with the law or children are involved as victims or witnesses with the justice system. Particularly on child protection, there are on paper 800 community child protection workers. That was an initiative. They are based not at the district, but they are based on the traditional authorities, and they were they received. They were funded by the Global Fund at the beginning, but since this experience was proved to be a very good experience, the government decided to take on board 300 of them, which now are on the government payroll. The data we collected could not confirm the actual number of them, so this would require further investigation because, as we will see later, they are playing an important role in the child protection system. And as I already said, the term social work is not very common in other line ministries, nor in civil society organizations. In civil society organization, people tend to use more the labeling of program officer or project officer or child protection specialist or counselor. These are all, of course, social welfare figures, but the etiquette which is used is not social welfare or social workers. The same is true also for other ministries, where you have, for example, within the police, within the community policing department, you have a community child protection policeman, which of course can be associated to some social welfare tasks, but they are not recognized as social workers. In this slide, we can see some figures on the actual distribution of social welfare workforce. So on your left, you have a map of Malawi, which just showing the absolute number of district social welfare officer per each district. What is interesting is to show, to see how the distribution of social welfare officer per district is already uneven between the north and the center and the south. So in the north there is a 13% of population living there, but there are almost double percentage of social welfare officers there. And while in the center-south there is a more even distribution. In terms of ratio, there is one social welfare officer every 100,000 population nationally. It's interesting to see the 10,000 square kilometer number of social welfare officer in a country where, like Malawi, where mobility is a challenge. There are nearly 13 social welfare officers in a circle that have around 110 kilometers of diameter. I'm trying to move a little bit faster. In terms of role and responsibilities of social welfare officer, they have the lead role in social welfare management at district level, and they are in charge of the whole case management, not only for child protection, but in general for social welfare, also for elderly, for disabled, for unemployed, and so on. So the role is to identify, assess, and follow up cases. They also have to inspect and supervise child care institutions at district level, and they are chairing the child protection coordination mechanisms at district level. Here it's interesting to see how these mechanisms can be very different across the district, but still social welfare officers are present, and in most of cases they are chairing these coordination mechanisms. And they liaise with the justice sector through probation and with communities through the community child protection workers. Very briefly, the training system candidate must undergo to become a social welfare officer is through a Magomero College, which falls under the Ministry of Gender, who provides 2 certificate training courses, one on social welfare and one in community development. So social welfare has a clear mandate on child protection, while community development is broader in terms of economic and social development. And Magomero is also partner in the training distance learning program for children at risk. It's worth mentioning that normally the training on social welfare is done on demand by Ministry of Gender for recruitment process. So the last training happened in 2005, where nearly 40 people graduated, and we have seen after that the shift in the priorities of the development agenda, where social welfare was not anymore a priority. So, for example, even within the ministry, the Department of Social Welfare became a division under the Child Affairs Department, and now a new restructuring within the ministry has brought up social welfare to department level. Some key analysis point, we have identified some challenges and strengths. Standards have to be set for effective service delivery. We know the distribution of social welfare officers per population. We know too little on the actual workload to understand if this ratio is good or not. There are rural and urban disparities and also gender disparities that need to be addressed. There are in-service training mechanisms that need to be put in place. Very often, training mechanisms, in-service training mechanisms, are project-oriented, and they're very focusing on the short term. While there is a need to invest in the medium and long term to strengthen the capacities of social welfare workforce. Resources and means need to be adequate, especially for early interventions, monitoring, and follow-up. Very often, when social welfare officers receive a report of a child abuse, they don't have the means to move to the place, to move to the village, meet the family, meet the child, and do some investigation and assessment. So this is, of course, a big challenge. And operational guidelines need to be developed in order to fully implement the Child Care Protection and Justice Act. In terms of strength, there is a wealth of field experience which is available, and this also refers, as Guy already said, also from NGOs and other civil society organizations. They are contributing to social workforce. Job descriptions are available and are adequate, even though some fine-tuning needs to be done in order to adjust it to the level of existing capacities. The lead role of the social welfare officer is foreseen by the law and is clearly understood and accepted by all the partners involved in child protection. There is still an issue on, and we will see later in the next slide, about how they are perceived by communities and by families. And there is, of course, a training institution which is already good and has a clear strategy to strengthen its capacities to offer a more appropriate, even more appropriate training on social welfare. The last slide is about some key consideration and challenges in collecting data on social welfare workforce. So, as I already said, the revised version of the toolkit, which dates January of this year, has a new specific tool on social workforce. So there is no such a matrix as Child Frontier has developed, but we deemed that it was important to have a specific part on the social workforce that was actually working in child protection. The social welfare officer play a pivotal role in formal child protection mechanisms and could be the gatekeepers with community endogenous mechanisms. The risk is to have two separate and parallel child protection systems, one which is based on formal mechanisms and the other which is based on community and endogenous mechanisms. Social welfare officers are exactly in between, and they can play a good communication role and coordination role in this sense. Little is known how they are perceived by population and the reason why. So, for example, when you consider the quite high rate of violence against children and the actual number of cases that are reported, there is a misproportion. We don't know if this misproportion is due to the fact that people do not trust social welfare, or they don't know that they are mandated of such tasks. Child protection is one of the many tasks that SWOs are responsible for. I already mentioned the elderly, the disabled, the unemployed, and so on. Definitions have to be agreed upon, and quality standards have to be defined for social workforce. As I already mentioned, social welfare is considered to be a duty and a responsibility of Ministry of Gender, but still there are a lot of people performing social work in Malawi. These differences need to be addressed in order to have a clear understanding of the social welfare workforce, and quality standards have to be defined, incentive mechanisms have to be put in place, monitoring mechanisms has also to be created in order to supervise the way that social work is performed in Malawi. And the last open question is about one of the role of social welfare officer, which could be focused more on service delivery or more on service mobilization. Just to give you an example, when you have a case of a child victim of sexual abuse, if the social welfare officer is in charge of providing a service, he will do the counseling, he will do the psychosocial support. While if his role is more to mobilize services, his role will be more to connect the child with a specific NGO or any other service within the health system to provide the child with all the services he might need to recover after the episode of violence. I have two final remarks as conclusion. The first one is there is a clear political will to invest on social welfare workforce. UNICEF and USAID, with the support of CapacityPlus and other partners like UNDP, are already working with Ministry of Gender to strengthen the capacities of social welfare workforce in Malawi. And the second consideration comes from, I think, from both presentation, mine and Guy's. There are some similar patterns that are coming out across the countries, which are worth exploring. If you think of the similarities of former colonizers' social welfare systems, or if you think about the mismatch of the actual response and the set of values that have that are present in specific communities and cultures, I think that it will be worth analyzing these aspects, not to come out with a global solution, but I think that there are some problems in common that can be studied and can be solved through this analysis. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Manolo. We have time for a couple of questions, and people have been writing in questions. So we wanted to start with one that was specifically about your work in Malawi, and it was about a question from Cote d'Ivoire, and it's one that's come up before in some of our other webinars. Could you elaborate more on the community social work stipend that is paid by the government?
Yeah, we have just some information. So the stipend is provided not to social welfare officer, but to the community child protection workers. This figure started as a volunteer figure and was receiving a stipend from the Global Fund. And given its success, the government decided to take on board 300 of them, and there is a plan to scale up. We don't have yet information on the exact information on the adequacy of this stipend and salary. In general, what we already know is salaries and stipends are very often not adequate, so there is not big incentives on staying within the ministry to perform social welfare officers, and there is a tendency to leave to greener pasture when the occasion is there. There will be a national consultant carrying out a child protection sector budget review. After that, we will have more information on what was allocated, what was committed, and what was actually spent on child protection, and this will help us also in identifying adequate incentives mechanisms to allow people to do their job in a better way.
We have a couple of questions in here about comparing the Maestral methodology with the Child Frontiers methodology. What we think we'll do with that is we will hold those until the final question and discussion period. So we want to ask one more question, though, about Malawi, and that is, and again, this is an important question as we think about it, about mapping and assessment and doing workforce gap analyses. How did you enlist the government participation in this effort, or was the mapping in particular commissioned by the government?
I would say that participation from government was challenging at the beginning because of this new idea of the child protection, of the system approach to child protection. So there was a gradual and increasing commitment of government towards child protection, and the final point, I think, is the child protection system has been included in the Malawi Growth and Development Strategy for 2012-2016, which is the development document for social and economic development of the country. So there have been a series of talks, a series of advocacy meetings to have everybody on board. The challenge comes out when there is no direct mandate on child protection. So if you consider, for example, all the good things Ministry of Education is doing in setting a safer environment at schools, this is, of course, a child protection responsibility that lies with Ministry of Education. That Ministry of Education will not consider itself as a child protection actor. So in this sense, there has been a process which lasted throughout all the mapping and assessment, and the mapping and assessment itself was a way to advocate for the adoption of child protection system, because people could see the different links between the different parts and different components and different piece of work they were doing when compared to the global child protection system. I hope I've covered the question. Yes,
yes, we think you did, and we appreciate that. And there have been some questions that have come up about where they could access the different tools and resources. And there have been a couple of responses, one by Sean and one by Brigette. The one by Sean, I think, looks at where you could find Maestral's toolkit. And then there's a broader one that Brigette put in the last comment, which has both links to Child Frontiers and Maestral and to several other tools and policy documents. So with that, thank you very much for the work on Malawi. Very interesting. And what we will now do is go to two people who are going to be discussants and to look at particular questions that stem from the presentations and go beyond them. One question that came up a little bit in both is how do we engage with community level actors when we map the workforce, and the discussant is Patrick Onyango from Uganda. So while he's discussing, if you have ideas or reactions or questions, you can also continue writing those in the chat box. And over to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Jim, and good evening to you all. We've had some mapping in Uganda, and out of this mapping, we've been able to identify community-level resources that are available to the response to OVC situation in the country. Part of which was a social mapping, which looked at all sorts of resources, but also identified gaps existing. And out of the mapping, we were able to identify the need for training and specialist training, professional training, and part of the training curriculum that we have developed has been integrated at postgraduate level, but also at undergraduate level. In so doing, we have, however, come to realize that community-level actors who largely comprise informal structures have a lot of undocumented information about their activities. We have also seen, and I think it's been largely shared in many platforms, that these informal structures are some of the frontline responders to issues affecting children, child care, and child protection. However, for them to get involved in the ongoing efforts as far as social welfare workforce strengthening, we seem to be facing certain dilemmas. Firstly, the way these informal actors are organized is all very loosely structured. They are not recognized within any government mandate. Neither are they recognized within the service delivery structure. And therefore, the question that I've been pondering, that I would like to hear from different experiences, is how can we ensure, whether it is through mapping or strengthening child protection systems, that these community-level actors benefit from social welfare workforce strengthening efforts, especially since most of them don't fall within the classification of social workers, and yet at the same time we're increasingly coming across evidence that they are very key to the care and protection of children.
Patrick, what you might do, so that was a good question, and that should go out to people. And as you have ideas, responses, reactions, if you could write that into the chat room, that would be very helpful. And then secondly, Patrick, perhaps as they're doing that, you might say a few words about what your thoughts are on that particular question.
Thanks, Jim. As well as starting the discussion, what we've seen happen in Uganda is that it's very critical that following the mapping of these structures, we try to link them to formal systems within their communities. It could be the office of the probation officer, it could be the office of the district health facilitator, and we think, and in some cases we have seen this approach of linking the formal and informal structures make it easier for these structures to report on their work, but also make it possible for the formal structures to tap into the social capital that is held within these community level actors. However, as we've discussed before and in different webinars, these linkages are not very clear. And I often share an example that in the work we do with communities, we've never seen a traditional health worker approach a district health officer with referring a patient in need of specialized care. And sometimes these linkages seem very much mechanical. And even when we look at strengthening the workforce, a lot of the work is done within these informal actors. And in some cases, we've had good and bad experiences in Uganda where we have tried to access and penetrate or identify entry points that would allow us to engage with these community level actors. And we leave them in a worse situation. We go in and identify one or two leaders of the women's group or one or two leaders of the youth group. We take them out to a training course, and when they come back, they misrepresent themselves, and we find the group cohesion is greatly affected. I'll just try and type the question in and perhaps also draw interest and input from experiences in different countries. How are we engaging meaningfully with the community level actors that belong in the sphere between the informal actors and the formal service providers? Okay.
Okay. So we'll keep looking for responses which are coming in to this particular question. I think one of the things is that it is a kind of somewhat new area for, I think, people doing gap analysis or mapping and assessment about how best to do that. And so I think you mentioned that you've had some good experiences and bad experiences in Uganda doing it. You gave us an example of one around some training with leaders of women's groups and youth groups. As you're thinking about it, does anybody else out there have other examples that they could summarize briefly in the chat room? Or does anybody else, or either Guy or Manolo, do you have any opinions about what might be helpful in this area?
Can I try to provide some thoughts on that? I think that much depends. Hello?
Please continue, Manolo.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think that much depends on the way you plan to develop the system, to strengthen the system, and how much these community actors are involved since the beginning in strengthening the system. So I'm referring more to the child protection system, but I think that in a larger scale, this consideration can also be adapted to the global social welfare of workforce. What we so we don't have specific evidence, but we got this from talking with people. There is a very, very good level of experience on the field, but this experience is not capitalized and very often remains with the person. There should be some, I would say, peer-to-peer or mentoring or coaching mechanisms by which capacities are transferred mutually from social welfare officer to civil society actors and vice versa. And the other thing is that sorry, I lost my. I will come back. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Manolo. What we're getting some responses written in the chat room, and we realize that the second question is somewhat related. We had a second discussion question, which said basically that several countries have recently carried out mapping exercises. What are some lessons learned, particularly related to identifying and involving the community-level social service workforce and forging partnerships with government-level workers? And I should just add that we're using community-level social service workforce as a label, even though it may not be exactly the right label to use. We're still struggling with, because there's a whole bunch of labels that fit under that. They could be volunteers, they could be volunteers who get paid a stipend, as the example was in Malawi. They could be basically community-based caregivers. But why don't we start with this question, and we can give Stephen a chance to do some sharing with what responses he's had to this so far, and then we'll continue asking you as you look to write into the chat box. So over to you, Stephen.
Okay, thank you all very much, and welcome to Ghana. Well, as the question states, what are some lessons learned, particularly related to identifying and involving community-level social service workforce, forging partnership with government? As you said in the introduction, the definition of community-level social service workforce may not be the appropriate word, but I think that for now, this is what we will settle for. And I'll refer to the two previous presenters, the speakers, Guy and Manolo, who did such a good job in talking us through the general mapping systems, and the particular one for Malawi. That lightens my burden, because we have already talked about what the mapping was about. Guy talked about identifying structures and functioning of the formal system. And Manolo was talking about how do we identify the workforce. Who are these people that we are talking about? So we will begin by looking at trying to identify what we are talking about when we are talking about the social service workforce. In the mapping, we just had formal and informal workforce. But I think that we need to break that down a little bit further if we're going to talk about linking these together. Now, the formal sector we have been referring to as perhaps those social workers who are working for the government. Maybe those who have qualification in social work, trained in the field of social work. And they are working usually in the ministries that are responsible for social work. And if you look at even the names of some of the ministries in Africa who have responsibility for social work, you will find an interesting development. The ministry in Malawi is Ministry of Gender, Children and Community Development. Now, the social welfare name there is missing. And it happens so in several places. In Ghana, we have the Department of Social Welfare, which is under the Ministry of Employment and Social Welfare. And then we have the Ministry of Women and Children's Affairs, both having some amount of responsibility for child protection. Now, if we look at the people who work in that system, in the government departments, they are those who are specialized in child protection, various forms of professional training. But there are other government ministries and organizations that are doing some amount of child protection issues, but they are not usually included in the department or the ministries that are responsible for social welfare and child protection. For example, these are the ministries of health, the Ministry of Education, Justice, the police service, the judiciary. These may not be trained in child protection, but they definitely perform significant child protection services. The discipline of children, early childhood for the education service, police investigating juvenile crime, the judiciary that has family tribunals and juvenile courts. So when we talk about the formal system then, and we say the formal system is small and overworked, I think that this is the one we are referring to. For us in Ghana, the ratio of social workers to the population is 1 to about 40,000. And this, of course, is very small. And that's the group that is usually specialized, like probation officers, medical social workers, case workers, and rehabilitation officers. That's the formal workforce I would describe. And this goes from the national level down to the regional and district levels as well, because you have some of these departments and ministries down to the district level. The informal system I would describe as the traditional systems, the traditional practices that protect children in our community. And this will include, of course, the families themselves. We have the traditional rulers, the chiefs and the queen mothers. We have tribal headsmen, religious leaders, local political leaders, and then NGOs that work at that level. Now, we do not have, we cannot quantify that and say that they are so many. But we can look at the quality of interventions that they need to be providing at that level. Some of the practices, traditional practices, customary practices, will not stand today's need for a rights-based approach to child protection. And so we need to measure that quality, what they are doing against what we now think is modern. So now that we've defined these two systems, or let me say three systems, the social welfare proper, those who are working in social welfare departments and have social work training, and those who are in para-social work institutions, and then the informal traditional system. How do we link the three of them? First of all, I think we need to identify and locate the traditional, the informal system. Because there are differences in communities, there are differences in practices among those communities, the different norms. So we need to identify and locate the actors and the way they perform their child protection issues. Again, once we have done that, we need to train them, we need to introduce the standards that are required or are acceptable for the child protection system. One way we can also do is to include traditional actors in the formal committees we form at the community level. One difficulty for us in Ghana is the issue of child panels. We've been trying to get the child panels to work without too much of a success. And we're wondering if, for example, you included the chief as the chairman or as a member of the child panel. Would that work? And would it effectively link the formal system to the informal system? Another way we might do it is to recognize the activities of the informal sector, ask them to record what they do, and submit reports to what we call the formal sector. That is giving them some amount of recognition and some amount of inclusion in child protection systems. But it is not, I'm not thinking that it's going to be as easy as that, because the example I give, for example, if you put a traditional chief in a committee, who will be the chairman? Because in that community, everybody defers to the chief. But if it is a government organization, if it is a formal structure, will the chief then defer to the chairman of the committee or vice versa? These issues, we have to investigate a lot more and try to integrate them, because whether we like it or not, a lot of action is taking place at that informal traditional system. And we need to recognize that and to bring them on board. And I believe that this just starting point from our perspective in Ghana, that we might at least attempt to begin to use that to integrate the two sections. As for the two formal sections, workforces, the strictly social work and then the parasocial work, these are things that we are already attempting by the multi-sectorial committees that we have, and there are a lot of them. And that also raises the issue of this coordination, because you put various ministries together, who is responsible and who does what. So I would think that this is the basis, I think I've set a basis for the discussion. I'd like to thank you.
Thank you. There you go. Thank you very much, Stephen. That was a very detailed response to the question, and I think gives us quite a bit of food for thought around how you're approaching it in Ghana. And what we would like to do is to make a bit of a transition at this point, as we're at that stage. So we've had two overall presentations and then two discussion questions. There are some people writing in the chat room in a continuing way with this continues that discussion through the chat room. But we did want to ask one sort of question that begins to tie this together a bit and provide either Guy or Manolo a chance for a concise response. It's a question that came up earlier, and it was stated as follows. It said, I can see potential useful complementarity between the model of Child Frontiers and Maestral, where it's useful to determine the number of staff, both formal and informal workforce. And obviously we've spent some time here on the informal workforce, but also to analyze their mandates and actual functions. And we need to know whether the workforce is busy doing actual social work or performing managerial duties and so on. So just any kind of closing comments from Guy or Manolo about any kind of comparisons you see between the two methods, and whether there are any particular last final thoughts about the best way to include the informal workforces we've been talking about.
Hello, hi, this is Guy again. I did just want to make a couple of comments on the last point, actually, and to see whether this kind of begins to wrap up a couple of ideas. I mean, I think that often what we are managing to document in a more sort of indexing or numerical way is the formal government social service workforce. That tends to be more accessible and better documented. So I think there is probably a large untapped sort of network or resource within each of the countries that are possibly not reached sufficiently through either of the methodologies. However, what I do think is important is that we adopt, and this is what both of our methodologies do, is really to look at both quantitative and qualitative. In that way, I think it gives us a head start when we begin to sort of look at redesigning or reformulating parts of the system. And just very quickly, I think one of the things that we see is that often the government role is formalized, often a statutory kind of based response based upon legislation, but that really the local level social service workforce should really become the bridge to complement that formal workforce, which is never going, the formal workforce is never going to be able to reach, with the given resources in most of these countries, the vast majority of children that require services and require attention. But I don't think at the same time that really it is feasible or perhaps even ethical to be trying to train these service providers at the local level in social work and assuming that you can become a parasocial worker through a very short course. What I think is a positive way forward is to begin to recognize the very important roles that these service providers are currently providing within communities, and to bolster that role, so that where you look, for example, at the role of the Queen Mother or religious leaders, church groups, to be able to enhance their role in the protection of children without undermining the kinds of relationships that they are able to forge with families and communities that are in difficulty. So what I would like to see at the local level is more of that sort of engagement, defining of roles in participation and through discussion with these actors, and not to automatically assume that we can turn people or professionalize a group at the local level into a very formalized workforce easily.
Thanks very much for that, Guy, and certainly that last point resonates as I look at it. What we're trying to do is to kind of match up what's needed with what are the kind of skills that could be provided to satisfy particular needs, and it may look different within the formal system as versus a kind of need at a community level. And how do you get, and I like the words, without undermining, how do you get the more formal government workers to work in collaboration with and acknowledge and recognize some of the good work going on at the community level? We want to give then, Manolo, any final word any final thought that you have about the kind of methodologies or this issue around the informal workforce?
I think that there is for sure a complementarity, since we are covering basically the same research question, which are very basically who's doing what in child protection, in social welfare, under the social welfare angle and under the justice angle. So both Child Frontier and Maestral methodologies started from these basic questions, and then further investigation started from this point. I would like just to add, but just as a reminder, I think that Patrick has a little more first-hand experience in that. The mapping and assessment methodologies can be also complemented, and actually they are already complemented in Uganda, for example, with ethnographic studies on community-based mechanisms to protect children. And the same will be done in Somalia, and I think, if I'm not wrong, even in Sierra Leone something similar has been done. I think Guy made a very important point. We have to do our best to avoid duplications, to define clearly what are the role and mandates of formal actors and community actors, and we have to find ways to make these two subsectors communicating together. A child stealing an apple is an issue that can be handled at community level, but how this case of this child should be also communicated to the formal. This is a referral mechanism, but it's also a way of sharing how children can be protected, and sharing a vision on how children can be cared by the social welfare system. From formal, but also by the families and communities. And the last point is just is again something that came out by the international comparison from Child Frontier is the issue of congruence. There should be a congruence between the formal and informal sector, but there also should be a congruence between these two sectors and the set of values that are underpinning behaviors and practices at community level. Thank you.
Oops. Okay, thank you very much, both from all of you around the issue and around the kind of comparisons between methodologies, and also going more deeply into the issue around how to deal with community-based actors. Very important. So we have, just moving towards closing, a couple of closing remarks that I was going to make, and then I'll hand it over to Brigette, and then to Maury. I would go back to some of the original discussions about data, and I think this speaks to both, I think, what both presentations talked about, with sometimes the difficulty in accessing data. Certainly something we found when we've done workforce gap analyses is that the data is not always easily accessible, that there is a bit of a process of trying to dig out data and trying to ascertain the accuracy of it. Having said that, it's really encouraging to see the amount of activity at the country level around mapping and assessment, around looking more particularly at the workforce. There is a lot of activity, and that data represents a process because different units or subunits or players often hold parts of the data picture, and in sort of trying to assemble that, we're also making linkages and networks, which I think are going to be positive going forward and would continue to operate and share more information than they have in the past. So that's one issue. The second one is just a reinforcement of this need. I think that Manolo finished by talking about congruence, but the need for appropriate and equitable inclusion of community-level actors, workers, people who contribute to that network at the community level for child protection, and provide either services or provide support for services. Because many of those don't even see themselves necessarily as either workers or providing services, but they really provide terrific support for it. The last one that I think is more looking forward is that my hope would be around that as this data becomes more and more available about the workforce and about gaps in the workforce and ways to strengthen it and ways to increase the linkage between the formal and informal components of it, that this data will in fact then be used to inform policy, to inform strategy around workforce strengthening, and then ultimately to guide implementation. So we're kind of at that stage where there's a lot happening, and I think the processes used to gather the data would be very important in helping people commit to actually taking action with it. So those are the three thoughts that I had about it that was sort of overall from this. So let me pass this on to Brigette, and Brigette, to add your thoughts to these.
Thanks, Jim. I also have three sort of comments, thoughts as we come to the closing, and I think the first goes back to my introductory remarks and several comments through the presentations. Is just the importance of assessing the social service workforce within broader systems mapping, not in isolation. I don't think it's enough to just do a human resource gap analysis, for example, and the reasons why would be we risk reintroducing a siloed approach if we look at just specific components without looking at the overall system. In the past, child protection was siloed or fragmented because we had an overemphasis on thematic groups. I think today our risk is that we could actually create silos by having an over-focus on one component over the others. And this works against our sort of system strengthening goals in general, and to look at all components together and to make the best decisions on how to do some overall strengthening, even if we prioritize one component to reach our goals. The second thought I think I'd like to share is also the importance of more specialized assessments to complement these broad mapping, to provide the sort of depth of analysis and information that we need for good decision making. I strongly believe that there's a need to drill down, and many of the broader mapping would not provide us with sufficient information to make good decisions around workforce. It can flag issues, it can identify gaps, but I think we need to drill down and just reinforce the point that one mapping is not enough. This raises a question in terms of sequencing specific and general assessments or consolidating them if they've been done at different times. Rarely do we have sort of a linear approach to assessments. And right now there's no formal guidance in terms of how to do that, and it needs to be decided at the country level. But I think the important point is that they can complement each other and they can help together lead us to making better decisions. And the last thought, I think, is just around the sort of two parts, is the importance of looking at the role and tasks of the social welfare workforce, both formal and informal, within the context of the national resources and within the context of the existing systems framework. And this is often the case, but sort of favoring this direct service model as the main modality for providing services, where government sees itself as a direct service provider, often based on colonial models, may not be the most rational choice when we look at this within the context where there are scarce resources. And often that's what we start with, but I think what mapping provides us is an opportunity to reflect whether that's a rational choice, particularly when we know that most protection is provided in the front line by community actors. And also, and this is critical, and it goes back to both Guy's and Manolo's presentation, is looking at critical is to look at the perceptions and experiences of community members vis-a-vis some of the formal structures. It's critical for us to understand these perceptions and real experiences so that we can have a better understanding of access and to access barriers. Just in short, trust is key to access, and regardless what the structure looks like in the functions, if we have a question of trust, which many of the mapping exercises have demonstrated to us, we can't move towards providing better services for children and families. And those are my closing thoughts, Jim. I will pass it back to you or Maury.
Great. Thank you so much, Brigette. Thank you, Jim, for your closing comments and for your moderation. Thank you to Guy and to Manolo for your excellent presentations and for helping us to learn a little more about these really exciting methodologies. And finally, thank you to Patrick and to Stephen for leading our discussion and for offering their really insightful comments and perspectives. And I guess one final thank you to all of you who logged in today. We have some excellent, excellent questions that we have made note of, and we were able to answer some of those, I know, and some of those we were not able to answer during this discussion. I wanted to just go ahead and let you know, remind you that a summary, PowerPoint presentations, and a recorded version of this webinar will be available on www.ovcsupport.net within the next few weeks. We will also post the links to the toolkits and the reports that have been mentioned during the presentations and in the chat window, and also the wiki that Brigette referenced and is included in the presentation here. We'll post all of that on ovcsupport.net and make it very, very easy for you to access those. Also, just to let you know, those unanswered questions, as I mentioned, we will post them on the ovcsupport.net discussion board and try to engage our speakers and our commenters and try to get them to answer those within the next few days. We'll also send out an email with the summary and links to the recording and to all of these different toolkits and reports that we mentioned within the next few days. So if you're on that listserv, you can be certain that you will get it in your inbox. If you're not on our listserv and would like to receive this information and future information about future webinars and other relevant activities, please send an email to swws.webinars@capacityplus.org. Just a few final announcements. I wanted to mention that Amy Best, the new coordinator of the Social Service Workforce Strengthening Alliance, who's been with us today. She's been very silent, but she's been pulling the strings in the background. She'll be traveling to Sweden within the next 2 weeks to make a presentation at the International Federation for Social Workers 2012 Joint World Conference on Social Work, Social Development. So she hopes to see many of you there if you are planning to attend, and if not, we look forward to hearing about her experiences there and the things that she's going to learn. If you have any other events or opportunities that you would like to announce, then please write them into the chat window or write to the listserv coordinator, and we'll be sure to post those and let other people know about those opportunities. Finally, I wanted to mention that our next webinar session is tentatively scheduled for August 2012, and the suggested topic is financing the social service workforce, which I know is of interest to me and to many of you because you've asked many questions about financing today. So if you know of someone or if you yourself would like to make a presentation on this topic or have information on this topic, please let us know what you would like to contribute. And again, you can write to the listserv coordinator and we'll get in touch with you and we'll find a way to make sure that you're able to participate in that webinar. So that is it from me and from those of us in Washington, D.C. It has been a pleasure to spend this morning with you, or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. And we look forward to talking to you again in August, if not earlier. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.